On this week's show, we're going to be talking about McLaren clinching their first double podium of their season and their continued revival. Red Bull managing to clinch the constructors' title without any help from Perez this weekend. And, of course, go through some inbox, which I do promise isn't solely about Sergio Perez. I promise there is some non-Sergio Perez in there. Let's kick it off. Hello and welcome to another episode of Back of the Grid. Just the two of us this week. Chris and I will be running through a Japanese GP review. Sadly no Stu, but I think we're back to full strength next week. Is that right?
I think so.
Yeah.
It's been a weird few weeks, but I think we're going to be back to normal quite soon.
Yeah. I mean, the more likes, shares and subscribe we get, the more chance you have of us all being here. Promise.
One like equals one stew.
There you go. That's too low of a target. That's too low of a target. We're not doing this YouTube thing right. No, but yeah, seriously, if you are joining us on YouTube, thank you very much. And yeah, remember to like, share, subscribe, put stuff in the comments below. As you can see from all the episodes, we like interacting with the comments both here and everywhere else. But yeah, we'll always pull up your questions for inbox as well if we see any. But let's talk about. Yeah, let's not talk about the future of comments. Let's talk about the weekend just gone of the Japanese Grand Prix.
It was a good one, I think. Not good in a different way. It wasn't like... I don't know. It felt like a very different race to a lot of this season, but I still enjoyed it. It was a little bit... There were times when you looked down the time in Terror and it was just pretty much all the teams were together. But... normally, when you see that, it leads to a very boring race. But actually, it kind of came together quite nicely towards the end, especially.
Yeah, it was a nice, enjoyable one. I mean, I must admit, I wasn't in the crew that got up at like crack of dawn for it. I must admit, I watched it about 30 minutes delayed. So I just turned all notifications off and just sat and watched it delayed.
Yeah, same.
Because, yeah, some of the notifications would have definitely ruined it for me, I can tell you that much. So, I mean, some of the craziest talking points around where we'll probably go first. So I'm going to let you do your recap, and I'm sure that you'll probably start where I expect you to start, and we can get into that stuff.
Well, we'll do the positive Red Bull stuff first, which is that they have sealed the Constructors' Championship for the 6th time. I mean, if there were any doubts about the Red Bull of Verstappen after Singapore, they're pretty much gone. He was like over half a second quicker than anyone else in qualifying. Like, unbelievable guy. Did you see like there's a few different outlets do where they do like a visualization of all the qualifying laps and how close they would be over the line. Yeah. And Verstappen was like car lengths ahead of anybody else. It was a phenomenal lap.
Just answers the point we were talking about last week with the fact that if there's anywhere in the entire season this car's going to truly excel, it's probably a circuit like Suzuka. And
might as well have been built for that car.
Lo and behold.
Yeah.
It's like we sometimes know what we're talking about.
We did see again what is maybe the only weakness of that Red Bull, which is getting off the line. Like, it was a pretty tardy start for Verstappen. I don't know how Verstappen held the lead. Like, stuck in the middle of the track with McLaren either side of you, managing to keep the lead. I mean, he must have just hit the brakes as late as he possibly dared to stay ahead of them. It was, I think, impressive stuff.
A combination of, being as late as possible and a little bit of elbows out, I think. But it's interesting when he has these starts, he does always put it down to just essentially hitting too much wheel spin. So whether there's something they need to look at in that regard when it comes to like the way that they've got the clutch program for the starts, I don't know, but yeah, it's the only real weakness in his entire.
It has to have one, right?
That and Singapore, that's it.
Yeah,
they're the only two weaknesses. A little bit of wheel spin at the starts, and it can't be fast in Singapore, which For a championship season that's 20-something races long, I'll take that.
Yeah, I'll take that. I mean, beyond that, though, I mean, it was just dominant from start to finish, basically.
Yeah.
Like, what can you say? I mean, the gap in the end was about 19 seconds he won by something, but that was obviously with a couple of safety car interventions, so who knows how big that gap could have been. But yeah, I suppose we'll move to the other side of the Red Bull garage.
Sadly, this is the bigger talking point than the 6th Constructors' Championship. And I mean, on a championship note, I guess before we move away from it, Verstappen can still mathematically clinch the title on the Saturday, which you were kind of hopeful for the weirdness that will ensue should that happen.
Yeah, that makes me happy. It's actually quite likely again now, which...
Yeah, I
think Perez has to outscore him, basically, to keep it going.
Yeah, I think that it's unlikely, isn't it? I mean, at this point, I'd be surprised if Perez even scored points in Qatar at all, considering where he's been recently.
I mean, Max always seems to manage to win championships in a slightly odd way anyway, so it would just kind of keep that going.
I love how you referred to it as a slightly odd way.
I'm not opening any cans of worms.
There you go. That ends it all. Twitter, or X, whatever you are now. No more debates on 2021. It was just a slightly odd thing to happen. Just slightly odd.
But yeah, I mean, they won that title kind of despite Perez. It was only 5th in qualifying, 8/10 off Max, which is honestly far from the worst qualifying he's had this season, but it wasn't great. He got damaged at the start. Probably not really his fault, the one off the start. He kind of just got pinched between Hamilton and Sainz, I think it was.
Yeah, it was just a bit of argy-bargy at the beginning, that one, I think, wasn't it?
Yeah. I'm not even sure where you'd put blame for that incident, to be honest. I think it was just one of those things.
Do you know what? He had that much of an eventful race thereafter of things that were his fault and his problem directly that I'd kind of forgotten about that, if I'm totally honest.
Yeah, I mean, he had a bad start as well, which kind of put him in that position, but it's not like he actually caused the incident. But yeah, so he lost his front wing there. Then, when he's taking his pit stop to change said wing, he picked up another penalty for overtaking under the safety car, which initially it looked like it was when he was coming out of the pits and he'd steamed past some people and had to slow down. But then later in the race, there was also a replay of him entering the pits, and it looks like he'd gone past somebody on track before he had hit the pit entry line. So I don't know which one it was he actually got penalised for in the end.
I believe it was the one on entry, and the thing that was misleading about it was obviously the fact that initially the thing that they were showing was him coming out, but the penalty was specifically for him.
Yeah.
I can't remember who he went past. Was it Alonso, I think? He sort of gunned it up alongside someone, and I think it was Alonso on his way in.
Yeah, it might have been.
And officially hit the what will have been the safety car line too soon. Yeah, it's... I mean, the one... It would have been harsh if he got a penalty for the other one, I think, because he came out, obviously avoiding the debris and everything, worked out where he should be, and then kind of let everyone pass. Like, he didn't do anything untoward, I don't think, on the way out, essentially.
Yeah.
So I think like there was a lot of talking commentary about like if that's what it's for, it seems a little harsh, and I sort of agreed with that. But then when you go to the entry and him intentionally gun it and essentially, again, it's fine margins, but he's hit that safety car line, he's hit that timing point before the car ahead of him, or that should have been ahead of him, and that's in itself is a penalty, isn't it? It's
a pretty silly mistake to make as well.
Yeah, it's the same as. Doesn't matter if you speed in for the first 5 feet or of the pit entry or not. It doesn't matter how far it is. Like you've done it, unfortunately. So
exactly.
Yeah. The first of the smallest of many mistakes. Let's say.
Yeah. And then we had him trying to overtake Magnussen at the hairpin, which was just such a clumsy dive bomb. Like. Just slinging his car from miles back into a gap that was always closing. Like it just looks desperate, doesn't it? If it just looked like he was overdriving, trying to make up for a bad start to his race, basically.
I mean, it was virtually identical to what he did to Albon in Singapore.
Yeah, it
Just
really was.
like shove it up the inside and hope the other car somehow disappears. Like, not even being in line with the rear axle really at the time of trying to make a move, because that's the point of contact, is like his nose and his front axle to their rear and their side pod. So it's, if that's the point that you're making contact midway through the corner, the move was definitely never on. There's no arguing it at all. And so Julian Palmer, I think it was, made a very interesting comment on the F1 commentary on F1 TV, saying, I wonder if earlier in the season there was a point where everyone saw a Red Bull in the mirrors and kind of just moved out the way. Like, whether it's that they're half assuming it's Max coming to lap them, or whether it's that they're just like, I'm not going to fight this because it's the Red Bull. Whereas now people are starting to think, well, it's Perez and, he's not actually that fast in that car. I'm going to see if I can... I'm going to hold position, essentially. Like, I am going to fight it. Whereas earlier in the season, they were maybe just giving it away a lot easier, and Perez is almost still in the wrong mentality of, I'm just going to put the car here because they just get out of my way because I'm in a Red Bull. And unfortunately, it doesn't work like that, especially when you're having the form of the season that he's currently in.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Then there was also, when he was under the VSC that P caused with that collision, he was kind of limping back to the pits, but kind of not going that slowly and sort of staying on the racing line. And Norris was really annoyed because he lost something like 9 seconds to Verstappen because he was not sure if he could
overtake
was
him.
Actually okay to overtake him or not.
It was somewhere near Spoon, I think that, wasn't it? That he was holding Lando up pretty much.
That was all very weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then obviously he retired and then unretired later on, and we'll talk about that later on. I'm sure you can guess which bit of the podcast will bring that back up. But I think I read someone said in the last 2 or 3 races, Checo's picked up more penalty points than championship points.
Yep.
Hamilton's now only 33 points behind him for second place in the drivers. Because Red Bull have never got a 1-2 in the Drivers' Championship, and that's looking like...
They're not going to this season.
No, it still might not happen. Yeah, and this is all a couple of days after Red Bull confirmed Ricciardo and Tsunoda are staying at AlphaTauri next season.
Mm.
The message the whole time has been Perez has got a contract for next season. That's the way it is. But you've got to wonder how long they're going to persist with that, especially now they've got Liam Lawson kind of there waiting. He had another decent weekend, and he's very much waiting in the wings as well. They've got plenty of good driving talent.
No points for either AlphaTauri this weekend, but Lawson was ahead of Tsunoda by the end of the race, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was 11th and 12th. I think they finished.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Do you think Perez is still going to be there next year right now?
A part of me wants to say no. I just he's becoming as unreliable and do you know what? I think it will really depend on if he manages to hold on to the second place in the championship. Let's put it that way. But it's when you look at the points gulf between him and Verstappen, it's similar to the difference between in comparison between Alonso and Stroll. The performances feel, at least at the moment, similar in the sense that Verstappen's absolutely getting the maximum and beyond out of the car, and Perez is just tooling around just bumping into things and other drivers that he shouldn't be. And that feels very much like what Aston Martin's current headache is that Alonso's there getting as much as he can out of the car, and Stroll is pootling round or wrecking it in qualifying and doing so much damage to both the car and himself. He can't compete in the race full stop, let alone when he does start a race and retires from it or finishes way down the order. Like, I feel like they're almost similar situations, and the number of people that call for Stroll to be gone, I'd be very surprised if there's many that call for Perez to stay, if that makes sense. Like, what's different in the two scenarios, I guess is what I'm getting at. TLDR, what's the difference between Perez and Stroll? The colour of the car, probably, and that's about it.
Max, who is our resident Discord statistician, informs us that Hamilton needs to pre-Suzuka, Hamilton needs 6.1 points more than Perez per race to overhaul him, and he's not done that at any point in the season yet.
Okay.
But if Perez is having DNFs, that could change very quickly.
Yeah.
But like, you know, I've there's been a lot of Perez bashing. That's kind of been one of the main sort of plot points of this season, and you always want to give drivers a chance, but like, is he performing any better than Albon or Gasly did when they got dropped? I don't think he is.
And herein lies the thing for me is people can talk about how dominant this car is to the ends of the earth, but like the fact that Perez is in second place is owed to that. Like,
yeah,
that when he does manage to put a clean weekend together, it by proxy is getting a podium because he's just managed to stay out of trouble, which is a bizarre situation to be in. But like, if he has to have a good weekend to scrape a podium, but this car is capable of like winning every race bar Singapore, basically.
Yeah.
Like what? Max has nearly twice the points as him. Twice the points. That's ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous.
Like, you know, the Drivers' Championship is never an accurate measure of, you know, the order of how good the drivers have actually been. But there's a lot of drivers on that list I would say are closer to being the second best driver this year over Sergio Perez, that's for sure.
I'll give you an interesting stat for this conversation. Do you know who's got the most second place finishes this season?
I think it's Lando now, isn't it? After
he's tied.
How is he tied?
Sergio. So his second place this weekend tied him with Sergio Perez.
That's mad, especially when you think where that McLaren was.
Yeah, how is a car that was finishing, I don't even know what it was, like back of the pack, 18th, 17th, 16th at best, first three races of the season. How is a car that was there now got a driver in it that's like essentially performing in theory at the same level as Sergio Perez was earlier in the season? Like,
I mean, as much as that tells a story about the way McLaren have turned this season around, it also tells you a story about the season Sergio Perez has had. Yeah, that's for sure. We'll carry on talking about McLaren then, given that we've mentioned them. As you say, double podium, maiden podium for Piastri. Finally works. He's come very close a couple of times, but it's finally worked out for him. Piastri actually the faster of the two in qualifying. He lost second place at the start. He kind of ended up back in second through strategy, but ultimately the team asked him to give second place back to Norris because Norris was quicker. Like, Piastri is definitely still missing a bit of race pace in comparison to Norris, but the gap's getting smaller and smaller, isn't it?
It's one of those things where he's in a rookie season. Like, I'm not going to expect him to be on Lando's gearbox 24/7, but I think that this is the kind of thing that will unfortunately happen when you're in a rookie season and you are slightly off the pace. It's not. The thing is, I think Piastri's a sensible enough guy to not take that situation to heart, take it personally, you know, see a negative in it, because the way that Lando like instantly disappeared down the road just showed the extra pace, and Piastri will know full well that, like, you know, if he can chase off and even just threaten Max, like force Max to have to, you know, put in the best laps he can to maintain the gap, that pressure is enough to maybe force a mistake or cause him to have to move from like a 2-stop to a 3-stop because he's having to use his... Like, that's the kind of pressure that can lead to the victory, because if you just let them cruise off and just go, no, we're comfortable with this 2-3, let's just sit here, you A, open yourselves up to the attacks from behind, and B, don't put that pressure on the guy that's in front to force, well, attempt to force a mistake, attempt to force them to think about strategy a little bit more and make it difficult for them. And I think Piastri's smart enough to, like I say, not really see anything beyond that. I mean, yes, I'm sat here in a Lando Norris shirt, but like it's a team game, and unfortunately that was the team move in that scenario.
And given where that team are currently, there's no point as a driver really you arguing over second and third place. Yeah, you know, maybe Verstappen had like crashed out on one of the opening laps and it was for the win, he probably would have argued it a bit harder. But you know,
exactly, yeah.
Given where McLaren are right now, what they're fighting for, it was the sensible choice all around, really. And
the other side of it is that it would have happened eventually anyway, even if they'd have told them to settle it between themselves on track. With the pace that Lando had, he would have made the move had he had to. He just didn't want to essentially push against his teammate, use up his tyres, etc. if he didn't have to. That was the whole point of the conversation.
Yeah, it's not worth risking it.
Yeah.
Unlike Mercedes, who for the second race in a row just seemed to want to fight each other rather than anybody else.
Yeah, it was a bit of a weird one, this one. I don't know where it came from. I don't know. I feel like they could have got a slightly better result if they'd not done what they did at the end, let's put it that way. I mean, I know it's only one place, but I feel like there was a potential that with... Essentially, the second that Lewis went ahead of George was a sitting duck and he was going to get overtaken. I understand mitigating the risk of if they don't swap the cars, they risk them both being overtaken. But it was George to Lewis to... Which Ferrari was behind them? Was it was Sainz. So... in that order, Lewis had the better opportunity to defend because George was the one struggling. And it was very, like Carlos called it out himself, but it was like very reminiscent of him leading Lando around because he was aware that if he gets overtaken by Lando, he will be a sitting duck for everyone behind him. And so it was almost a mirror image of the scenario, and that's why I think that they possibly could have held out in the way that... I think the difference is the circuit. Suzuka's not like Singapore, and it's a lot easier to awkwardly position yourself on an apex and make that move impossible at a circuit like Singapore. And I imagine that's the main thing that was going through Mercedes' minds of, we can secure a fifth and maybe a sixth, but if we stay the way we are, we potentially lose both.
I think Sainz would have got them both if they'd have tried to faff around staying the same way. And it's also worth noting that when Sainz did pass Russell was still getting DRS off Hamilton at that point, and Sainz passed him anyway. So that just shows, because Russell gambled on a one-stop and it didn't really pay off for him. So I think it was smart for them to just, Lewis is clearly a lot faster, just let him go.
Overall, I think it was the right call, but there is a part of me that wanted to see if they could have done it the other way around. I genuinely think they've at least had a good go at it, but probably the right call overall.
Yeah, I think so too. Ferrari generally looked quicker than Mercedes again. I think Mercedes were a little bit caught out by the temperatures being a bit higher than expected there. Like, Mercedes have generally had a bit of a tyre advantage over a lot of teams, but with the higher temperatures that kind of evaporated, and Ferrari generally looked a bit quicker. They finished either side of Hamilton in the end. 4 races in a row now, Ferrari have outscored Mercedes. They're only 20 points behind them now in the fight for second, which has now just become Ferrari and Mercedes and Aston Martin have just kind of
disappeared,
fallen by the wayside.
Yep.
Alonso's still the only driver to make Q3 at every single race this year, which is something. Only just.
I was about to say, by the skin of his teeth.
Yeah, but he could only finish 8th. He reckons 6th was possible, but the team just kept pitting him into traffic, which he was pretty frustrated about that. And to be fair to him, like I see his frustration. Like every time he came at the pits, it was just traffic city for him.
Yeah, he was not a fan of the strategy, was he, this weekend?
No.
I think, again, just something from coverage that kind of got pointed out that you don't always think about, but tension always feels high for Alonso in Suzuka. Like, it is somewhere that he holds quite dear. Like, he's a very big sort of fan of the culture and the circuit itself and so on. Like, I think he holds it in that high esteem that he always wants to do so well. It means a lot to him to get the results at Suzuka and in Japan, and I feel like that's why there's all these boiling pot moments where it just like bubbles over and you get the little explosion from him, because this is Suzuka for the infamous GP2 engine rant. And
I think the drivers all just love that circuit as well and like want to get a result there.
Yeah, out of all the circuits going, like just in the world, it's probably one of the ones that, in terms of like just general public doing like simulator racing and even casual arcade racing on games consoles, whatever, it must have some of the highest lap count in it.
Oh, it's got to, yeah.
Circuits like that, Spa's probably another one, maybe Silverstone as well, like just these big headline ones that have more or less been the same for 50 years. I mean, yeah, fair enough, they've had modifications to them, particularly Silverstone out of that lot, but to be part of the like traditional race circuit bunch, I think means quite a lot to people. And I mean, people used to win and lose championships in Japan, didn't they? Like it was like end of the season, this sort of time when we were racing there. And yeah, I've got so many memories from like the 90s of people winning and losing championships there. And
you'd always want to get up early because you didn't want to miss the championship being decided live.
Yeah, exactly. And there's a difference of why I didn't get up this year, because it was only the constructors this year.
But yeah, going back to that second place battle, like Aston Martin are now 64 behind Ferrari and 84 behind Mercedes. Like I can't see them getting that back at all.
It's not good.
I reckon Ferrari are going to pit Mercedes today in the end, the way they've been closing that gap.
They're in better form generally, aren't they? It would seem, and Sainz personally appears to be in very good form since the summer break, as we talked about last time. So
they've got 6 races to claw back 20 points. That sounds doable.
Yeah, unfortunately for Mercedes, I think so.
Yeah. Who's next on the list?
Alpine, probably. Yeah.
I mean, on paper, it looks like not a bad result for them. Like they had a pretty ropey qualifying. Ocon got a puncture on the opening lap, ended up finishing 9th and 10th, both cars in the points. Not a terrible result under the circumstances, but they just seem to like be creating this like inter-team drama unnecessarily. Like that they asked late in the race, the team asked Ocon to let Gasly through because Gasly was on fresher tyres. They wanted to see if he could chase down Alonso. Completely makes sense. He didn't. He didn't make any inroads into Alonso at all. So then on the last lap, they were like, oh, okay, give the position back to Ocon then. And Gasly just kind of questioned it and was like complaining on the radio. And then, I don't know if you saw his onboard after the checkered flag, but he was like waving his arms out the cockpit and like punching his steering wheel and punching the halo and stuff and like complaining in the interviews afterwards. And Ocon was just like, I've been at this team years, that's what we always do. And it just feels like it feels like Gasly overacting, but also I just think the team didn't. Like every other team, when they do this kind of thing, the message is always, he's going to let you through, go and try and get the guy ahead. If you can't get him, we'll swap back.
Yeah.
And it felt like they didn't say that to Gasly. And then he got all
Did you hear what they
angry.
did say? Have you heard what they did say to him? Because I haven't. I think if it was played on my coverage, I missed it. I must admit.
I think it was just Ocon will let you through at turn whatever. I think that's all the message was.
Alright, so yeah, it's
just weird. And I also don't see why he's reacting that badly over 9th and 10th place.
Who was the one, sorry, that was this is an instruction? Was that George and George and Lewis? Okay.
That's who was like, oh, should we do it last lap and do the DRS? I'm like, no, George.
This is an instruction.
Yeah. I don't know if that's Gasly being frustrated with the team or Gasly not liking Ocon finishing ahead of him, but it was just seemed like a massive overreaction. It was a really weird one.
Yeah. Maybe there's something else under the surface we don't know about.
It feels like it, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Who's left? Alfa Romeo had a nice big upgrade package. They both still went in Q1, and then they both got caught up in various messes on the opening lap. Bottas retired. Zhou limped home to 13th, but
honestly, if people didn't crash into them during a race, I would kind of forget they existed, I must admit.
I mean, I would hope that their upgrade package was focused on better race pace, which obviously they didn't have enough time to show if they had any.
It never panned out.
Yeah. Rough day for Williams as well. Double retirement for them. Albon also a sort of opening lap victim. He got just sort of punted into the air. He tries to keep going for a while as well, but that was a big old hit he had to come back from.
It was technically the last retirement, I think, when I look down the list.
He might have been.
He lasted the longest out of everyone, from what I can see. 26 laps. So I suppose it depends on at what point you stopped counting Perez's laps and started counting them again.
Yeah, that's true.
Because he's down as doing 15 laps here, and I genuinely don't know how many of them were after he'd already been in the box. But
yeah, that's a weird one. And then Sargent had to start from the pit lane. This is a weird one, actually. He had that massive crash in qualifying.
Yeah.
And then the team had to replace so many things on the car, they inadvertently broke the rule about having the third car, which is why he had to start in the pit lane, which is pretty funny. I've not even heard the term third car in about a decade.
They changed so many parts, it was basically a new car.
Yeah, the FIA were like, that's not the same car anymore. You're going to have to start from the pit lane.
I'd love to know where the line is of, this is the same car, this is a different car. Is it a certain number of elements? Is it a certain combination? Is it just a certain one element? I'd love to know where they draw the line of, nope, that's a different car now, that. Cause
it's like the ship of Theseus thing where you keep replacing parts and, is it even the same car anymore?
Yeah, exactly. To be fair, though, there's quite a few times that people wipe all four corners off a car in quali and don't get that same penalty unless they've damaged the gearbox or something and they've had to do a gearbox change. But yeah, but again, that's a precise penalty for a precise change. It's a gearbox change and therefore it warrants that pit lane start penalty and stuff like that. If this is explicitly, you've basically built a third car, guys. I'd love to know where the line was, genuinely.
Sargent, though, another big crash in qualifying. Then he locked up and ran into Bottas at the hairpin.
Yeah.
I mean, he's another driver that we've sort of tried to give the benefit of the doubt and the time to improve, but I don't know, that qualifying crash, that felt like a bit of a line had been reached for me.
Yeah. I mean, it's also the stuff in the race. The car looked like he got a bit of he got a bit loose unexpectedly in qualifying. I can give him some kind of benefit of the doubt or whatever for something like that. I mean, everyone during the weekend was comparing it to an incident Kubica had when he made his brief return. It was very, very similar, sort of just understeering into the grass, and then at that point you're just a passenger that you can't recover it at that point just because of the speed that you're coming around that final bend anyway.
Alan McNish had a very similar crash in the same place for Toyota years ago as well.
Yeah, like it's definitely doable if you either get a little bit of a snap or the front end washes out. Like there's definitely scenarios that can cause it, so I can give benefit of doubt to that. But yeah, just his driving standards in the race have really been subpar. I mean, unfortunately, he's fallen into the territory of reasons why Mick Schumacher no longer has a drive.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's people used to be able to put up with the damage to the cars and stuff for the sponsorship money because it outweighed it, but now in the cost cap era, it's just not feasible, I don't think, anymore, and that's why Haas just couldn't maintain the situation with Schumacher, and I feel like Williams might start having to reconsider the situation with Sargent, which is a shame because he's done well in junior Formula, and it was really promising to see him move up onto the grid, but I don't see what he's bringing to that. Look, when someone like Liam Lawson could potentially have that seat next year, I know who I'd choose, let's put it that way.
Yeah, and this is the thing, isn't it? I think the only thing that might save Sargent is that Williams kind of very much for a few years have been like, he's our guy, he's the one we're going to bring up. And they have kind of said over the last year that they did end up promoting him probably a year earlier than they ideally wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I do think that junior drivers aren't given nearly enough time these days compared to how it used to be. But again, at the same time, as someone in the team, particularly as Williams are generally improving and moving up the grid these days, you need to have the best two drivers you can in your two cars. Like, Williams are in a real championship fight this year. Like, they're still holding on to 7th place, but Haas, Alfa Romeo, not a million miles behind them, and they've only got one driver scoring points for them. Like,
I mean, I don't just sorry on this note, but Max has just posted something in the Discord called the World Destructors Championship, which I've not seen before now, and the top culprits do not surprise me whatsoever, but the actual gap to generally the rest of the field is insane. So if anyone's not seen this, maybe we can repost it somewhere or something, but essentially Logan Sargent, Lance Stroll and Sergio Perez have all done well over $2 million worth of damage to their car, allegedly. And then you've got like Bottas, Verstappen and Alonso. I mean, I want to read how many people it takes me to total up Sergio Perez's damage. Verstappen, Bottas, Alonso, Hamilton, Norris, and then a bit of George Russell. That's how much it takes to do the same amount of damage that Sergio Perez has done. I'm not even going to try Lance Stroll because I'll probably, or Logan Sargent, because I'll probably get a lot further up that list.
And that's, you know, when you're a team at the bottom who's not getting anywhere near the budget cap, it's...
Yeah. It's a lot of the money to be losing to stuff like that.
Yeah, it's the last seat unconfirmed on the grid now. And... Yeah, I mean, they don't need to rush it. I guess they'll wait until the end of the season and make a call then. I did see someone ask Christian Horner about Lawson potentially being loaned out to Williams. And interestingly, he said, I'm not sure Williams would want to take a driver just for 1 year, which there's a lot to be read between the lines in that comment.
Yeah, definitely.
And then the last team we have mentioned is Haas. They were the last two cars that finished on the road again. They've got an upgrade package coming in Austin, apparently. I mean, it can't come soon enough for them. That car just continues to go backwards. Doesn't help when you're getting punted off the road by Sergio Perez, though.
No, definitely not.
Anyway, driver of the day?
Yeah, I mean, I don't always like doing it, but I find it very hard to look past Verstappen on this because it's just so dominant. Like,
yeah,
and especially it's another one of those races where he's got above and beyond out of that car, no matter how good it is, and his teammates down the back of the pack just smashing into people and taking weird penalty pit stops and coming back out to serve penalties. Like the contrast is just so stark. Like, it's just so ridiculous, the difference. It's day and night. And I think that just adds to it. Like, 100% there's got to be shout-outs for the McLaren boys for finishing where they did ahead of the Ferraris and the Mercs, who were like the legit second-place contenders in the championship they are. I'd be very interested if someone can be bothered to do the legwork before I do it, of looking at like a championship McLaren big updates and then post, just to see where they actually sit in comparison to Mercedes and Ferrari, because I do genuinely think that they'd be, if they'd been this competitive all season, they'd probably... So what I'm thinking is take Aston's first half of the season form and McLaren's second half of the season form, merge them together, and you've kind of got where Aston should have been had they developed the car, and where McLaren should have been had they started the season like they are now. And just imagine if those two scenarios had been different, and you'd like genuinely got Ferrari, McLaren, Aston Martin, and Mercedes fighting it out tooth and nail for second place. I'd have not cared about Max running away with it, that's for sure, because that would have been hella good.
I don't think there's anyone else that screams out at me. I agree, like the McLaren guy's definitely worth mention, but I can go with Max this week, I think. Yeah,
that's fair.
What about move of the day?
Yeah, moves. There was quite a few, to be honest. I mean, a 130R is always good, and we got one.
Yeah.
We did get one. Hamilton holding the inside line against Alonso through 130R.
That was very good.
It's not quite the same as around the outside of 130R, but I mean, any 130R is good for me.
It's good all the same. The sort of Russell getting past Hamilton in the chicane and then Hamilton repassing him at turn 1 was pretty entertaining.
Yeah.
Leclerc getting Russell was very good as well when he went around the outside of turn 1 and 2. They used like the worst possible camera angles to show it. Like they showed most of it from Leclerc's helmet cam.
Yeah.
But he was going past someone, so you couldn't actually see the car he was passing. But
that was the one where they briefly looked at it in case he'd gone over track limits, wasn't it? That was that one. Yeah, that was a good move. That's up there as well, actually. Yeah, it's a good place to.
There was Lawson and Tsunoda on the opening lap as well. They kind of ran side by side for a few corners, and Lawson ended up getting ahead through the second Degner. I thought that was very good.
Yeah, that was good. I mean, I'm all the others are good, but I feel like I'm hard pressed to put anything above 130R personally. I don't know about you, but
no, I can go with you on that. It's always spectacular.
It's one of those corners where if I'm ever racing online on that circuit, I want to get somebody there just because I know how much of a move it actually is. I don't care about doing it anywhere else. I want to do it around 130R.
There's also nothing worse than being on the way to that corner and someone like hovering with their nose just next to you. It's like, oh, here we go.
Yeah, you know what's
we
coming.
both ended up in the wall here.
Yeah. So, yeah. Right, last one.
Honestly, what the f*** are we doing here?
I mean, I know where this is going.
There's only one thing it's going to be.
It doesn't even matter what... It was a race with so many potential candidates, but this just trumps and usurps all of them.
Like, how can you retire a car and then 45 minutes later send it back out? That alone is wild. But then the fact that you can unretire your car to serve a penalty in the pit lane to avoid having a grid drop for the next race. Like, how's that okay? It's so weird. Yeah, I just baffling. Like, initially I thought they were doing it so they could have a nice championship photo on the cool down lap and have both the cars out there for that. But yeah, he just went out, did a couple of laps, changed his tyres to serve his penalty, and then retired again. It's just so weird.
Yeah, the thing is, like, it's technically always been possible, right? Like, you've always been able to stick the car in the garage. Like, we've seen it before. We've seen people in essentially a retirable position, and because they've got like like recon parts on it, like new parts essentially that they're not fully understanding yet. They'll repair some like critical damage and still send them out back on laps, like 5 laps down or something. This was just way extended beyond anything that we've seen before. So it's not like it's the first time it's ever happened, but it's the first time it's ever happened to this extreme, and it's definitely the first time, to my knowledge, that someone's used it to circumvent a grid penalty. And I think that's the bit that gets me, is that I'm hoping that this is the bit of the loophole that they close. Like, I don't necessarily have a problem with teams repairing a car and sending it back out to start circulating again if it's safe and it's drivable, just on the basis that when you've got a race like this where you're already down to 15 finishes and, I don't know, say there's adverse weather, whatever, you might actually somehow 10 laps down still get points. Like,
yeah, you never know.
It is legitimately possible. So I don't necessarily have a problem with that part of it. The thing that I would say that they need to find a way of closing the loophole is that if you have retired, whether you rejoin or not, the penalty that you had at the time, if it was unserved, still transfers over. That's the easy solution to the problem.
Yeah.
Because they'd have not gone back out if that was the case. If it was like in a testing sort of, like, say we were, I don't know, early European races and people had new parts on the car, they would have potentially done something similar and sent them out just to get data.
Go out and treat it as a test session.
Exactly. And I have no problem with that, as I say, if the car's safe and they're not like tripping other people up, and you know what I mean, and it's just like it's safe. The penalty thing is the problem. And that's what needs to happen, is the moment you DNF, the penalties are taken there, like as in transferred over there, regardless of if you go back out. And then it's problem solved, I think, for the grand scheme of things.
Yeah, I think so. And I have seen people say that this sort of thing happens in F2 and F3, sort of, not a lot, but like you do see it happening, and the FIA have never thought to close that loophole in those. But then again, I don't know how much attention the FIA pay to F2 and F3 the majority of the time.
Yeah, I mean, like in the lower formula, you do see people maybe repairing cars and going back out to do recon laps, don't you? You do see it.
Yeah.
So if the car's not totally trashed, they do go back out. I mean, yes, it's a very different formula and race format, but like, I like the element of repairing the car under pressure to get it back out there and at least see the race to the end. And the reason I do is because it just makes me think of things like Le Mans and endurance racing, because that's exactly what happens there. You can take the side off a car, essentially, in a barrier, as long as you can get it back and don't leave the car until you're in the pits. As long as you can meet that criteria, it can be repaired and it can go back out. Yeah. So that, like I say, that part of this rule, no problem with. It's just this stupid penalty loophole that they've taken advantage of. And in the grand scheme of things, it probably doesn't actually affect things that much, because it's Sergio Perez, and he's probably going to qualify flipping 15th or something, and it'll make no difference to Qatar, because he'll fail to get out of Q1, and it wouldn't have done anything anyway, except maybe just put him behind a couple of Williams or a couple of Alphas or something.
Watch him stick it on pole now to prove you wrong.
Do you know what? I genuinely hope he does. I genuinely hope he does, but my gut tells me he won't with the way he's been lately. And I think that's the worst bit of it, is like, if this was a Max situation and like someone was close to the title fight and all that kind of stuff, it would be like so much more egregious. It just like, it makes me laugh that we've come across this situation for someone that's 200 points behind the leader of the championship and still second. Like, they've just won the World Constructors title, whether or not he gets this penalty or not. Like, there was nothing on the line. They weren't gaining anything in reality by doing it. They were probably just, honestly, it feels like it was just the Red Bull of, we found a bit of a cheeky way to circumvent this. Let's see how far we can push it. And on the basis that if it gets accepted and they don't do anything about it, everybody then knows it's doable for the future. If they do what they have and they say, we're going to close this loophole for future, then it's done, isn't it? But
yeah. Christian Horner said not having a grid penalty for Qatar was the only positive from Checo's race.
He's not wrong.
He's not wrong at all.
He's not wrong. So, yeah, so many other weird things that we could have talked about for this, like a trophy that you kiss that lights up when you kiss it. I can't think of anything else now because I'm now just thinking of watching Max Verstappen when he just did it all lit up. But yeah, there were definitely other things, but Perez going back out after 45 minutes just to stop a grid penalty is definitely the worst of it. Right, I'm going to run us through predictions. Average week for most people, I think. The highest score we had was 3, and 20 people scored that. So unfortunately, I've not got time to rattle through all those names, but if you head to the website at backofthegrid.com, you'll be able to find yourself in the list and see if you are one of those people, or if not, at least what you did get. Stu, our very own Stu, was one of those 3-pointers, mainly because of the split decisions we had about Sainz. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, he scored there, and obviously we all got double Verstappen. I want to give a little bit of a shout-out out of those 3-point scorers to Mike Dordlin. Literally the only person of the entirety of Predictions League this week to have gone for 15 finishes. The only person.
He chose Carnage.
Yeah, good choice. Nearly scuppered by Perez going out and trying to finish the race, but
yeah,
no, he got the 15. In terms of overall scores, Effortlessly leads the way with 35 points, and then there's 3 people tied behind Lee in second with 33 points. So very, very close in the top. At least it's much closer than the real championship. Let's put it that way. In terms of fantasy leagues, in the Grid Rival League, Discord and Patreon's very own Blaze. I'm sure Blaze is around somewhere. Maybe not listening live, but knocking around somewhere. 1,088 points in Grid Rivals this week. But the weirdest thing I've ever seen, one of the closest things I've ever seen, 3 other people finished second with just a single point behind. 1,087. Wow. So 4 people all within a single point, basically.
Which look at their teams.
Yeah, it was... Well, I mean, I'm an idiot. I did this race with no one but Oscar Piastri and McLaren.
Yeah, I forgot to update mine as well.
It's because the contracts ended after Singapore, and I'm so gutted because usually my team involves both the McLaren drivers and Verstappen, and then I alternate between McLaren and Red Bull as my constructor. And yeah, I could have scored so many points if I'd have remembered to go renew some contracts. So everybody else don't forget. It. So Effortlessly clearly doesn't forget though, because he has, I don't even know how to say this. It's such a big number. 16,259 points on the season for Effortlessly. So that's 2 leagues that Lee is leading. That's crazy. The predictions king. I'm assuming it's king. King, queen. I'm assuming it's a male league just because of the spelling. Apologies if it's not. And then F1 Fantasy, the official fantasy league. I managed to get in it this week. Alfa No More. Love that one. 298 points this week. I'm a little bit peeved by this one because I nearly won this league 2 weeks in a row. I got 295.
You're pipped.
Yeah, I got pipped by a couple of points. Overall, it's still Ricky Bobby Racing School with 4,727. Yeah, that's right. I'm having some sort of episode here. Like number, I've just become like
number troubles.
Yeah, whatever the dyslexic word for numbers is, if it's not the same thing. Like I'm looking at them and they're just all over the place. I don't know what I'm doing. With that, I'm going to move this to inbox and hopefully I can read those instead.
Keep it saying now. But stay up. Box. Hey man.
Shall I go first?
Yeah, you do the first one.
I'll go first. From Mike P. If Perez wins every race or DNFs every race for the rest of 2023, it has no impact on Red Bull's World Constructors' Championship or Verstappen's World Drivers' Championship. If you're in charge of Red Bull now, what hijinks would you get up to for the rest of the year with Perez's side of the carriage? That is bizarre that his results just don't matter anymore to anyone but that second place in the drivers for him.
put some like wild and wacky aero parts on it and just see if the FIA have any issues with them.
Yeah, just test some like boundary pushing stuff.
Yeah, test stuff that might knowingly draw an appeal, but just see if it works. I mean, you could put that on Verstappen's car at this point and it wouldn't really matter, to be honest. Give it one more race and stick it on whichever car you want. Give it one more race and get them to switch cars just to prove that it's not specifically that car, and just squash that whole conspiracy theory that the cars are different. Just swap them after Qatar, have it done with. He'll still win every race. Guarantee it.
Yeah.
That's the shenanigans.
Just send Perez out with car 33 as well and see if anyone notices.
Yeah. Just literally swap them with numbers and all and just see what happens. Yeah. Right, that's the shenanigans out of the way. Jay Alexander says, if Red Bull are to let Perez go, where do you think he would end up? He's shown that he's a very good driver in the past, but has this most recent season undermined his market value? I mean, yes is the very simple answer to the last part of that question.
It has.
So
I've always kind of seen him as sort of ending up doing kind of what Bottas is doing now, like moving back down the grid and kind of helping build up a smaller team. But like, honestly, with the current grid, I just can't see where he'd go. Like,
I think as good as a driver as he has been in the midfield teams, I think there's just some element of being in the front running and having that expectation on you. Like, he thrives as the underdog, and having the expectation and the demand on him appears to be a problem. And I'm saying that with reference back to when he briefly got the McLaren seat, which was when Lewis first went to Mercedes, and he was Jensen's teammate for a year to replace Lewis. And was it directly after Lewis left? Yes, it was, wasn't it? Because then Magnussen came in to replace Perez, if I remember rightly. Anyway, I'm getting off track. My point was that he went there and everyone was like, oh, it's just a bit too soon for him. He's not quite ready for that. But go look back at that McLaren season, and it wasn't too dissimilar to this season that he's having right now, just like clattering into... I mean, he clattered into someone, funnily enough, at Japan in a very similar fashion to what he did, because he nearly wiped, I'm sure it was Jensen out. Pretty sure he nearly took somebody out in a very similar fashion to what he did this weekend.
Well, Jensen was his teammate then, wasn't he?
Yeah.
And they definitely had some comings together around that season.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I think once he's done at Red Bull, I think he's going to be done in F1. I think that's probably going to be where he calls an end to it, to be honest.
I mean, he might get a bit of a random call up from like a Haas type drive somewhere in the future, but I'd struggle to put him anywhere else on the grid at the minute. And like I say, I think it's just an unfortunate thing that he's always been very good at being an underdog, like his time at Force India, his time at Sauber, and so on, and Racing Point when it was whichever iteration of that he was at. Like, all those different eras, he's been more competitive than the car for the most part. But there's just something about the step up to that next level, and maybe it is something to do with the way that there's higher teams set up and build the cars, or something like that, or the caliber of teammate is against. I don't know. I couldn't put my finger on what it is. I just feel like this season is a bit rinse repeat of that McLaren season, and it feels a bit like damning evidence of it's a bit too much for him, unfortunately.
I think what you said, like he thriving as an underdog, is a good sort of measure of what kind of a driver he is, for sure.
Yeah.
Next from K Menga, why aren't Red Bull pushing Lawson on Williams? In my opinion, it makes perfect sense for everyone to loan Liam to Williams for a year. That way, when they finally sack Checo, Liam will have a year's experience and Williams get a quick kid for another year to pick a long-term choice. I don't know if that's... See, this is the weird thing with Sargent. Like, as much as he's not performing and he's crashing a lot, I don't know if Williams want to just be having a new driver in that seat every single year. And if they replace Sargent with Lawson now, that's another single year with the driver, and then Red Bull will have him back, and they'll need to get another driver, and who knows what that will be. And obviously they've got stability now with Albon. Like, he's there long term. They're very much building a team around him. But yeah, the problem is I don't know where else Red Bull put Lawson.
No, not for next season. If they want him on the grid next season, it's literally the only place he could go.
It's either that or they're leaving him Super Formula for another year.
Yeah.
I don't know how, other than staying race fresh, I don't know what he'll gain from that.
Or somebody's breaking a contract to move him. Just on the back of this, Roxy's just asking in the Discord chat, do you think Liam would go to Red Bull or do you think Daniel would? I'm guessing this is meaning in 12 months' time when the Perez contract's over for 2025.
Yeah, I think... I mean, I was going to say earlier, if Perez continues to perform like he did this weekend for the rest of this season, I reckon he'll probably keep his seat next year, but he'll very much be like we'll review this after 5, 6, 7 races or whatever. To be honest, I think if it came to it, they'd probably just promote whoever was performing out of Ricciardo and Tsunoda at that point. I don't think they'd push Lawson up to Red Bull that quickly. I think Ricciardo's probably front of the queue right now, but if it got to that point and Tsunoda was outperforming him, they'd probably lean his way.
Yeah, I can't disagree with any of that. Next one, Charlotte Taylor. See, I told you there was some that weren't about Perez and Red Bull. If Lewis can finish second in the championship in this car, where would this season rank amongst his best? Very interesting question.
Again, I hate that we spent most of the episode bashing Perez, but I do think if Lewis finishes second this year, that does say more about Perez than it does about Hamilton. Hamilton's had a good year, definitely better than last year. I do think championship fight Hamilton is a different driver to not in a championship fight Hamilton. He's got an extra 5 or 10% that he only really switches on when he's properly in a championship fight that has not really been there that much for the last couple of years, I think. Yeah,
I think that... I mean, it's definitely a lot better than last season, let's put it that way. And the thing is, the guy doesn't have many bad seasons, so I think despite being a good finish, whether he's second or third, if he's in either of those positions, that's a very good finish for where the car maybe ought to be compared to some of the others around it. But in terms of just his overall performances, it's been quite a middle of the road season for him, I think. Generally, it's probably been it's a little bit more capitalising on other people underperforming than it has been him overperforming, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Whereas the championship fight years, whether he's won it or just come close, those sort of seasons are like out of his skin drives and like him, as Stu sometimes says, I'll borrow one of his phrases, but like him putting it somewhere it doesn't deserve to be.
Yeah.
Whereas this season it's been more people ahead of him have fallen away, allowing him to be. And don't get me wrong, it's been very, very good drives to put himself in the position to capitalise on those, but I think that there's only been like flashes of that proper raw,
like
Hamilton.
Like Sarah just said in the chat, we saw a bit of it in Singapore in that final stint, and I think if Mercedes had made the call to swap Russell and Hamilton, I think he would have won that race.
Yeah, and that would have been one of the solid drives, but it's not been like a season of them. And like, just going back to the context of the question, is like, where would the season rank generally? About average, I would say, in all honesty. With one or two very good drives in there, but nothing that's like, I'm not going to look back in 10 years' time and go, oh my word, do you remember like how good Lewis was in 2023? Like, it's not going to happen. So,
but yeah, by his very high standards, fairly average, I think. Last question this week from Anthony Durkin. Will the FIA change the sporting regs regarding Checo's 1 hour garage stop?
I believe they already have they not? Or they've put it in place too.
Well, so originally Ted Kravitz said that it was being pushed through to be changed, but then I've read something since that said that was a bit of a miscommunication. Actually, there's nothing official yet. To be honest, I don't think they will, and for no other reason than this is, to my memory, the first time this has ever cropped up, and I suspect they won't change the rule, and this just won't come up again for a long time. I think if it's a thing teams start doing repeatedly, they probably will look at it, because there's a chance now that other teams will like see this and be like, oh, that's the thing we can do to get away with a grid penalty. But
yeah,
it requires a very specific set of circumstances. Like, you need to have a penalty hanging over you and have retired the car, but also be in a position to send the car back out. Like, it's quite a specific set of circumstances.
It's definitely a middle edge case. It's out there.
Yeah.
I think the simplest solution to it all is one I said earlier, which is you just put something in place that if you've received a penalty and you then retire the car, whether you go back out or not, and if you've not served that penalty, it is transferred to a grid penalty, whether you go back out or not, basically.
Yeah, it can literally be like if you put the car into the garage, or if you're in your pit box for more than X time, you can no longer do it. Yeah, that's all it means.
Yeah, and that's the simplest solution. If they don't put that in, like you say, I think the edge case that it is, there's a reason that we've not seen it before, most likely, and that's because it's very rare that you end up in that situation more than anything. So yeah, I'm not going to be too concerned if they don't change it, but we know the fix is simple, so
exactly,
we win either way, hopefully. Oh, and that is it. We have managed a 2-man show, just the two of us. If you'd like to get in touch with us about anything from this week, or even start pre-sending questions for next week, feel free to do so. There's plenty of ways you can do it and get involved with the show. There's Facebook, just search for Back of the Grid. You can find us on X and Twitter, whichever name you prefer to use. And then there's obviously YouTube as well. Subscribe to us on there. Hit the bell for the new episodes. There's also all the shorts and stuff that we put out through the week. And then, like I say, we go through the comments on there and use some of those for inbox if there's ever any questions in it. So if that's your preferred medium, submit something there. Old school style, you can head to the website at backofthegrid.com and just fill in the contact form. And you can also go there if you want to register for the Predictions League or join any of the fantasy leagues and get your team involved in those. Always worth doing the Predictions League, even at this point in the season, because there is a prize if you get 5 out of 5. I think I've covered everything. Ooh, Patreon. If you want to get involved in the Discord, live chatting with us whilst we're doing the show and feeding us little tidbits of nice stats that we can read out, like the Destruction Championship, then head to patreon.com/Back of the Grid where you can learn how to get involved with that. So that is everything for this week, and we will see you next week as we start looking ahead towards Qatar. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.